I signed the marriage papers without flinching, while his wealthy white family smirked like they'd just bought themselves a maid. They thought I was desperate, just a black woman with no power, no name, no choice. What they didn't know was that the hand-holding that pen already owned their entire empire. For 12 years, they believed they destroyed me. But tonight, they were about to learn the most dangerous person in any room is the black woman you underestimate. Stay with me, because this revenge story will break your heart, and then set it on fire. I held the pen with a steady hand, though my heart thudded like a drum in my chest. Across the polished oak table, the Hayes family leaned back in their leather chairs, watching me sign their precious marriage contract. To them, this wasn't a union. It was a business arrangement, a lifeline to save their crumbling empire. And to them, I wasn't a bride. I was an object, a solution, a placeholder. Robert Hayes, the patriarch, didn't even bother hiding his impatience. His silver cufflinks glinted under the chandelier as he tapped the table. Good, he muttered, as if he had just secured another acquisition. His wife, Margaret, crossed her legs gracefully, her diamond bracelet catching the light, but her eyes lingered on me with disdain. She tilted her head, taking in my simple black dress and the scuffed purse resting by my side, and smirked. To her, I was someone they could parade as grateful, someone who'd keep her mouth shut and play the role of the obedient wife. What Margaret didn't know was that my silence wasn't submission. It was strategy. They laughed, toasted their champagne, and spoke freely about saving the family name. I sipped water quietly and let them think they'd won. In their eyes, I was nothing more than a desperate black woman who should thank them for elevating me from nothing. They saw me as invisible, someone they could mold, control, and eventually discard. And that's exactly what I wanted them to believe. Because the truth? The hand signing that paper already held more power than they could imagine. The irony was delicious. Every word of that contract was written to protect the Hayes fortune, a fortune that was already slipping away. Hayes Industries, once a titan in manufacturing, was bleeding money. Investors were gone, debts were choking them, and the whispers of bankruptcy were louder than they dared admit in public. Their only hope was this marriage, tied neatly to a partnership with Sterling Enterprises. A mysterious investor they thought would rescue them, but who was really waiting to bury them. That investor was me. I kept my face carefully neutral, my tone polite, the perfect act of humility. "Thank you for the opportunity," I murmured. And Margaret smiled, convinced she had found a puppet. They had no idea that 12 years ago, this same family had ripped Jonathan and me apart, offering me hush money to disappear from his life because, in their words, a black girl like me could never fit their world. They thought their check had bought my silence forever. What it bought was the seed of my empire. What it bought was my vengeance. As the last page of the contract was notarized, Robert lifted his glass high. To new beginnings. To solving all our problems. I lifted my glass of water in return, masking the fire in my chest. They saw a quiet woman with nothing to lose. What they didn't see was the storm I had been building for over a decade. And when that storm finally broke, the Hayes family would learn the most painful lesson of their lives. Underestimating a black woman is the costliest mistake anyone can make. The glass of water in my hand trembled slightly as Robert's toast echoed in my ears. To new beginnings. He had no idea those words were dragging me back 12 years, to the moment my world had shattered. Because before I was Miss Johnson, the desperate consultant, I had been Destiny, a college girl who believed in love strong enough to fight the world. And back then, that love had a name, Jonathan Hayes. We met during freshman orientation. I was there on a full academic scholarship, juggling 2 part-time jobs, while Jonathan strolled in with tailored blazers and the kind of carefree smile only old money can buy. At first, we seemed like opposites. Me, sharp edges and determination, him, privilege wrapped in charm. But beneath all that, we found something real. Study sessions turned into midnight walks, laughter turned into whispers of forever. By sophomore year, we were inseparable. Jonathan wasn't just my boyfriend. He was my dream in human form. The boy who held my hand when I doubted myself, who kissed me like I was his whole world. He would talk about our future with such certainty. "We'll build a life together, Destiny," he'd say, his eyes bright. "No one can stop us." But Jonathan underestimated one thing, his own family. It was Margaret Hayes who called me first, her voice sweet as sugar but laced with steel. She asked to meet me for coffee. I was naive enough to think she might be reaching out with kindness, maybe even an olive branch. Instead, I found myself sitting across from a woman whose smile never reached her eyes. "You seem like a smart girl," she began, sliding a thick envelope across the table. "Smart enough to know when to let go." I remember staring at the check inside, the number $50,000 staring back at me like it was screaming. I was 21, drowning in student loans, working nights to cover what my scholarship didn't. And then came the words that burned deeper than any insult I'd ever endured. "Jonathan's future can't be tied to a girl like you. Our world will never accept a black wife. Take this, start over, and disappear. Otherwise, you'll ruin him. He'll lose everything." It felt like someone had punched the air out of my chest. I sat there frozen, the taste of stale coffee bitter in my mouth. I wanted to scream, to tell her Jonathan and I were strong enough to fight anything. But then I pictured his face, his trust fund, his future crumbling because of me. And in that moment, I broke. I took the money. I didn't even say goodbye. I changed my phone number, transferred schools, and left Jonathan with nothing but confusion and silence. For years, I replayed that decision in my head, wondering if he hated me, wondering if he blamed himself. He never knew his family had bought me off like some problem to be solved. He never knew I had loved him enough to vanish. That check, that insult, became my fuel. I refused to let their money destroy me. Instead, I turned it into the foundation of something greater. I invested every dollar, lived on ramen and ambition, and worked until my hands ached. 5 years later, I made my first million. 10 years later, I became the name whispered in boardrooms, DM Sterling. So when I sat in the Hayes mansion, watching them smirk at my good fortune in marrying their son, they thought they were looking at a broken woman. They didn't realize they were looking at the ghost of their own cruelty, a ghost that had come back not for money, but for justice. The ink on the contract was barely dry when Margaret Hayes clasped her manicured hands together like a queen who had just won a war. "Now we can breathe," she declared, her voice honeyed with triumph. To anyone else, she might have sounded relieved. But I heard the arrogance buried beneath her words, the confidence that she had secured her family's survival at my expense. Jonathan sat quietly in the corner, his tie slightly loosened, his eyes fixed on the table. He hadn't said much throughout the process. In another life, he might have objected, questioned the fairness of it all. But years of being his parents' obedient son had left their mark. He wasn't the boy I had fallen in love with 12 years ago. He was a man weighed down by duty, moving through life as though it was scripted for him. Still, when his eyes flicked toward me, fleeting, uncertain, I saw something there. Guilt. Maybe even recognition. He didn't know who I truly was yet, but some part of him sensed the truth, that the quiet woman signing away her life wasn't nearly as powerless as she seemed. Margaret's control extended to everything. The wedding dress? She chose it. The flowers? She dictated every arrangement. The hairstyle? Nothing too bold, she instructed the stylist. We don't want her standing out. Her words cut deeper than she realized. We don't want her standing out. That was how they saw me, a background accessory. Someone to complete their narrative without ever becoming the story herself. Robert chimed in occasionally, more focused on numbers than appearances. Once the Sterling partnership finalizes, we'll be stabilized again, he said, as if I wasn't sitting right there. They spoke about me as though I were furniture, not flesh and blood. And I played along. I smiled politely, nodded at the right times, and whispered thank you whenever Margaret tossed me her thinly veiled commands. They thought I was the perfect pawn, agreeable, grateful, too small to pose a threat. But pawns, underestimated long enough, can become queens. Late one evening, while the house slept, I took a call from my assistant. My voice was soft, careful not to carry through the thin walls of the guest suite. She said, excitement trembling in her tone. The acquisition phase is nearly complete. We've secured enough stock to trigger majority control. By Monday, Hayes Industries will effectively be yours. I closed my eyes, letting the words wash over me. Years of sacrifice, of being dismissed, of carrying the weight of what they did to me, all of it was coming to this moment. Perfect timing, I whispered. Keep everything quiet. They can't know until I decide. The irony was almost too sweet. Robert spoke every day about Sterling Enterprises, that mysterious investor who would save their sinking ship. Little did he know that Sterling wasn't a faceless firm. Sterling was me, the very woman they had discarded as worthless. And Jonathan? He still looked at me with a kind of puzzled softness, as though I reminded him of someone he couldn't quite place. Sometimes I caught his gaze lingering, the ghost of recognition flickering in his eyes.
But he never asked. He never dared. That suited me just fine. Let them all stay blind.
Because when Monday came, the game would be over. And this pawn they'd dismissed so easily would reveal herself as the queen who had been moving the pieces all along. The wedding was held in the Hayes' sprawling backyard. Beneath an arch of white roses Margaret had handpicked herself.
Everything about it screamed control.
The flowers, the dress, even the music, none of it was chosen for me. It was all carefully curated to fit the Hayes family's image of grace and restraint. I was a prop in their redemption story, nothing more. I walked down the aisle alone, wearing the plain satin gown Margaret insisted on.
Nothing too flashy, she'd said. We don't want her looking out of place.
The words had stung, not because of their bluntness but because of their subtext.
Out of place.
That was how they had always seen me, a black woman who didn't belong in their whitewashed world. Jonathan stood waiting in a black tuxedo, handsome but stiff, his expression caught somewhere between duty and defeat. When our eyes met, something flickered, a trace of the boy who once held my hand under library desks and promised me the world. For a moment, I wanted to believe that boy was still alive somewhere beneath the weight of his parents' expectations.
The ceremony was short.
Vows written by lawyers, recited like lines from a script. I repeated the words calmly, even as my heart squeezed with memories of the promises Jonathan and I once whispered to each other in college. Back then, we had dreamed of a future built on love.
Now, we stood as strangers bound by ink and arrogance. During the reception, the charade deepened.
Margaret floated from guest to guest, her champagne glass in hand, introducing me with a rehearsed smile. Our new daughter-in-law, she said sweetly, though her eyes always drifted over me like I was invisible. Robert busied himself with business chatter, assuring relatives that Hayes Industries was on the brink of a great comeback.
Jonathan tried to be kind.
He pulled out my chair, offered polite smiles, and asked if I needed anything. But his eyes, they told a different story. They carried a sadness, a resignation, as if he was silently apologizing for a life neither of us wanted. Then, as I stood near the buffet table, I heard Margaret's voice behind me, low and sharp. 6 months, she whispered to her sister, her tone dripping with confidence. Give it 6 months and we'll have grounds for divorce. She'll take whatever settlement we offer and disappear back to wherever she came from. Her laughter followed, light and cruel. My hands tightened around my glass until I thought it might shatter. In that moment, every memory came flooding back. The envelope of hush money, the years of building myself from nothing, the loneliness of climbing higher while carrying scars no one could see.
They thought they could dismiss me again.
They thought they could erase me, as if I hadn't spent 12 years preparing for this exact moment. Later that evening, I found Jonathan on the patio, away from the noise. He leaned on the railing, his tie undone, staring up at the stars like they might hold the answers. Are you okay?
I asked softly. He laughed bitterly. Am I okay?
I just married a stranger to save my family's company. My parents are already planning our divorce. No, Destiny.
I'm not okay.
The way he said my name, familiar, tender, unaware of its weight, made my chest ache.
He didn't recognize me yet.
But one day soon, he would. And when he did, he'd learn the truth. The woman his parents had tried to erase was the same woman standing beside him now.
Not broken. Not powerless. But the storm about to sweep their empire away. Monday morning came like a storm. The mansion buzzed with panic.
Phones rang non-stop. Lawyers' voices crackled through speakerphones, and Robert Hayes paced the marble floor like a trapped animal. Hayes Industries stock had plummeted overnight, trading suspended after investors pulled out en masse. This doesn't make sense. Robert barked, slamming his fist on the table. The Sterling partnership was supposed to save us.
Where are they?
Why aren't they answering my calls? Margaret sat pale and trembling, her pearls clutched in one hand like a rosary.
We did everything right, she whispered. We got the marriage. We followed the contract.
Why is this happening? Jonathan, meanwhile, hovered in the background, quiet but visibly shaken. He kept running a hand through his hair, muttering, "It shouldn't be like this. None of this should be like this." I sat on the couch, calm as a quiet sea, a book open on my lap. To them, I looked like a bystander, too simple to grasp the severity of the chaos unfolding around me. But inside, I was counting the seconds. The moment was almost here. Then the call came. Robert snatched up the phone, his voice desperate. Yes, this is Robert Hayes. What do you mean the partnership is void?
We fulfilled our end.
Who is DM Sterling?
His face drained of color.
No, that's impossible.
They can't, 68%?
Controlling interest.
Margaret shot up from her chair.
What is it, Robert? What's happening? He looked at her like a man who had just watched his life crumble into dust. DM Sterling isn't a company, he croaked.
It's a person. They've been buying our stock for years.
Hayes Industries doesn't belong to us anymore. Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating. All eyes turned toward him, until finally, Jonathan broke it. So, who do we work for now? I closed the book in my lap and stood, smoothing the simple dress Margaret herself had chosen for me.
My hands didn't shake. My voice was steady.
You work for me.
The room froze. Robert's mouth hung open.
Margaret clutched her pearls so tightly I thought the string might snap. Jonathan's eyes widened, confusion and shock warring in his gaze. I reached into my purse, pulled out the official paperwork, and placed it gently on the table.
Destiny Marie Sterling. DM Sterling, as your board now knows.
The same woman you paid $50,000 to disappear 12 years ago.
Jonathan staggered back as though struck.
No, you're Destiny Johnson. A consultant.
You drive a Honda.
I smiled softly, the same polite smile I had worn all week.
I'm a lot of things, Jonathan.
Including the woman who just bought your family's empire with the money they once used to break my heart. Margaret let out a choked laugh, half hysteria, half denial.
You're lying. This is some kind of scam. You're nobody.
I stepped closer, meeting her gaze with steel. I am the richest woman in this city. I own 7 corporations, have investments in dozens more, and as of this morning, I own Hayes Industries.
So no, Margaret. I am not nobody.
I am the very consequence you thought you'd never face. Robert's phone slipped from his hand, clattering against the marble floor. Jonathan sank into a chair, his face white, his voice a whisper. You left, because of them. I nodded, my throat tight but my resolve unshaken.
They forced me to, but I didn't disappear. I built an empire instead.
And now, I've come back, not to beg, not to crawl, but to collect what was always owed. For a long moment, the room was silent except for Robert's shallow breaths and Margaret's frantic whispers to no one in particular. She looked at me like I was a ghost risen from the grave, a ghost her money should have buried forever. What do you want? She finally rasped, her earlier arrogance gone, replaced with fear.
Money? Revenge?
Just, tell us what it will take to give our company back. I held her gaze, letting the weight of 12 years press between us. What I want, I said slowly, is for you to understand that your actions have consequences. When you handed me that envelope, you didn't just buy me off.
You stole a love. You stole 12 years of my life.
And you taught me that the only security I'd ever have was the kind I built for myself. Robert's voice broke through, hoarse and desperate.
Please, Destiny, he swallowed hard.
We built Hayes Industries from nothing. This company is our legacy.
I raised my chin. And now it's mine. But I'm not here to destroy you. I don't need to.
Your arrogance already did that. Margaret blinked in disbelief, her lips parting as though she expected cruelty.
But cruelty wasn't what I came for.
You'll keep your mansion, your cars, your comfort, I continued, my tone calm but unyielding. Robert, you can keep working at the company if you choose, though you'll report to me. Consider it a generous severance for 3 decades of service. Her face twisted in confusion. You mean, you're not taking everything?
No, I said firmly. I don't need your ruin to prove I've won.
The fact that you're standing here, realizing the woman you once dismissed as worthless now controls your future, that is victory enough.
It was then that Jonathan finally found his voice.
He had been quiet all this time, staring at me as if piecing together 2 lives, the college girl he had loved and the woman now standing in front of him. His voice was soft, almost breaking. You left because of them. Tears stung my eyes, but I held them back. They gave me no choice. They told me if I stayed, they would take everything from you.
So I took their money and disappeared.
He looked away, jaw tight, grief and anger flickering across his face.
I spent years wondering what I did wrong.
Years trying to fill a void I couldn't explain.
His eyes lifted back to mine.
All this time, it was them. I thought I was protecting you, I whispered. But maybe I only broke us both. For a long beat, the air hung heavy. And then Jonathan stepped forward, his eyes searching mine. Maybe we can choose differently this time. Not for them. Not for business. But for us. That night, as Jonathan and I sat on the porch, stars scattered across the sky like promises waiting to be made, he reached for my hand. For the first time in 12 years, I let myself hold on. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. Sometimes it's success so undeniable that those who try to erase you have no choice but to respect what you've built. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, that success gives you the power to choose love over hate and second chances over closed doors. Stories like this remind us how dangerous it is to underestimate someone who refuses to break. Show your support by liking this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss the next twist. Tell me in the comments, what's more powerful in the end, building an empire to prove everyone wrong, or finding love that can survive betrayal?